It's Bob.
Yes.
Okay.
So let's just go ahead. The streaming seems to be taking its sweet time, but if we're recording, I can always just load the recording later if I need to. So
awesome.
Go ahead.
Then let's go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody. This is May 1st, and we are gathering here as the Manhattan Community Board for Bylaws Task Force. Are we a task force or a working group, Jesse? Task force, yeah? One of them. And anyway, we are
task force. Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay. We are working together, reviewing the bylaws that hadn't been reviewed in a couple of years, and just trying to see what we can do as a group to make them sort of as strong and as inclusive as possible. So we've met a couple times already, and we are hoping to be able to make some recommendations to the full board next month. But so we're just going through the bylaws sort of piece by piece. We're meeting here today on the squares because the executive order allows us still as part of the public meeting laws to meet on the squares, but I think that may be expiring. We'll find out more about that later, but anyway, it's in place right now. So that's why we're meeting today. My name is Katie Stokes, and I am a member of Manhattan Community Board. I am one of the co-chairs of this bylaws task force, and I'm going to turn it over to my other co-chair to introduce himself. Go, Bob.
Yeah, hi, I'm Bob Infato. I'm a public member of Manhattan Community Board 4, co-chair of this task force. I sit on the Clinton Hell's Kitchen Land Use Committee for quite some time now, and that's it for me. Thank you.
Great. And why don't we each just do a quick little introduction of like our name and maybe what other committees we sit on. So Candace, what about you?
Candace Hewitt, and I sit on Waterfront Parks and Environment, and BLP.
Awesome. And Frank?
Hi, I'm Frank Olazubiak. I'm the co-chair of the Business Licenses Permits Committee and sit on the Clinton Hell's Kitchen Land Use Committee.
Awesome. Alice?
Hi, I'm Alice Wonk. My two committees are Waterfront and Transportation.
We have the waterfront well represented here. And Wendy, over to you.
Hi, I'm Wendy Gonzalez. I'm on the ACES and the BLP committees.
Indeed, we sit on ACES together. So, you know, we had started going through sort of section by section last time. We hadn't made it terribly far, but we'd had some pretty important discussions about some of the points. And then I think we had gotten up to where you were going to take over, Wendy. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So can we turn to Article 4? And why don't you walk us through some of your thoughts?
Sure. So Article 4 is all about the election of officers. I felt like this was pretty straightforward, and Bert was my co-captain on this. And just looking back on his notes as well, I don't think he had anything for this section. My only note was in within Article 4, it is section E number 2. which deals with voting, and it says voting for offices shall be written by paper ballot. So it's just a general question for the committee whether we want to update that. Obviously, We've been in extraordinary times. I don't know if that's going to continue, but I think given the fact that we think we're going to be in some sort of a hybrid situation moving forward, we probably want to update that language.
Great. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, update too. And remind me actually, why am I blanking on this? How did we do it? It was like it was fully an electronic ballot last time, is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Akin to what we've been using for our full board.
So it would, going forward, assuming we would have a hybrid fashion, it would be a combination of paper and electric ballot.
And then Jesse, sort of technically, just to like, did you print all of the ballots after the vote so that we could so that you have them on file, or like, what did you do to sort of conform with this provision?
So no, I mean, we have them digitally.
Okay.
It would literally just be a record of people's votes.
Mhm,
It wouldn't be individual. It doesn't, the system doesn't create individual ballots. It creates individual lines of data.
Okay, so you're saying like it would say there were 13 votes for this person and 19 votes for that person.
Right.
And it would indicate like how many people total voted and how many people. Okay.
Yep.
Beats
right.
counting them.
What'd you say, Bob?
It beats having to count the paper. I remember when you had to count paper.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So the way we did it beforehand, what Bob's talking about is that, literally you would have Nellie and Janine in the back counting the votes as the meeting was going. They would come to me with, their, what they believe is their totals, checked by one of the others. I would check it, make sure it's accurate. And then I would actually typically sometimes even have the chair of the nominating committee check it. And then they would report it out.
Okay, but just actually, and I guess we can sort of do some research about this, but I guess just logistically, does anybody have any experience with votes taking place that are hybrid? Like, I'm just wondering, you want to make sure, obviously, that people haven't voted twice, but that everybody has had a chance to vote. So I guess you have to
I think it'd be
count
the
the number of
same.
people in the room, or
Yeah,
Or
I mean,
say what
we would have to have, we're gonna have to have 26 people in a room to have a full board meeting. So out producing 26, ballots that they fill out, we'll get those 26 back, do the same thing that we normally do, and then there'll be an online component to that as well.
Add on.
And then you would add them both together.
Katie,
My-
this is going to come up in a major way in Section 8, the voting section.
Okay,
And
yeah.
I think at the end of the day, it's probably going to be easiest for someone and maybe me to go through all the bylaws and standardize them, because ideally in some way that covers in-person and hybrid voting.
Exactly, yeah.
Current
That's
Article
clearly
8
one of the most,
Yeah, the current Article 8 is very tied to in-person meetings, so it's going to need a lot of technical work, but probably little conceptual work. Not to jump ahead, but it's an issue that comes up in various places in the bylaws.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but just something for us to think about.
And Jesse, didn't you want to change the month for when the committee meets?
You mean the nominating?
Nominating committee.
Yeah, I do. I was thinking of that, but I think if I would like to just fold that into the bigger conversation, I think that when you guys have, I'm assuming you're going to have about the idea of just the elections in general. So, yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, in terms, I don't know if it has anything. This doesn't have to do with. I guess it does have to do with the section we're talking about. Yeah, I mean, right now the bylaws has it like starting in September.
Yep.
Where the nominating committee is like first announced. And the reality is you guys are coming back from August and it's like kind of like right off the bat, you're talking about trying to put together a committee of people who haven't been kind of focused on board stuff for, at least a month and change. And so, but I'm not too, I would rather have you guys discuss fully what you think is the best route for the election process in general.
Yeah.
I just brought up because Article 4, Section A says.
Yeah, no. I wouldn't mind doing that. And I think if there's maybe if in other scenarios, if it's maybe not, if it's like that in between the second term, if there's no one running against anybody kind of thing, if we want to put that language in, then we can shorten it to a much shorter period. To me, that makes more sense than having to go through the entire process of getting a nominating committee together if there's no competition and no one is actually looking to run against anybody else. I think kind of like a lot of perfunctory work. So that's my other thought too.
Okay. All right, and but duly noted, and I've written it down that we might want to at least, like, depending on our further conversations, we might
Yeah,
at least want to maybe
If you
change
do
it
that, you
September
have
to
to
October.
change A to be that the committee is informed in September. Then you got to
Yeah.
change the next section, but you don't report out in October because you won't meet till October. You'd report out in November.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, and then maybe we can also just sort of, I guess we can always come back and revisit Article 4, because I'm even wondering, like, are there any changes we want to make to like the special elections? But and as you were saying, Frank, we can go back and make everything consistent once we have the bigger discussion about the elections. Okay, fair enough. So Wendy, that was generally for Article 4. That was the only suggestion, right?
Yep, I've got a couple of typo things I'll email you to separately.
Exactly. Yep, I saw some of those typos. Perfect. But yeah, if you can send them to me, that'd be great.
Yep.
Okay, and then I think you guys were also doing Article 5. Is that right?
No, we were 3 and 4, so I passed the
sorry.
baton. No worries.
That's right. Oh, that's right. Roberta, Alice, you said Roberta was 5 and 6.
Yes.
All right. Well,
So we can go back when she comes on.
exactly. Okay. Plus, it just sounds like we're going to have too much fun talking about election
Right.
stuff. Exactly. So first of all, yeah. So and Frank, you said your Article 8, is that right?
Yeah, well, 7 and 8.
7 and 8. Perfect.
Go
All right.
now?
So let's jump ahead there. Let's do that. I think Article 7 is probably going to be easier. So shall we start there?
Yeah, so 7's pretty uncontroversial. It's about the circumstances under which the board can issue support for either for-profit or not-for-profit enterprises, and talks about what that support can consist of. And it basically seems consistent to me with the way we've been proceeding. The final section of this, A3, talks about matters and other community boards. And subsection C caught my eye because I'm not quite sure. It seems very vague to me, and I'm not sure we do this. So I'm curious what Jesse and Bob think. It says, in all cases where another community district is directly affected by actions taken by the board, such community board shall be promptly notified of such action. So the standard directly affected seems pretty vague to me. And I have no idea if we actually notify other boards when we do things that, quote, directly affects them.
We do. Yeah, I mean, again, I think that the issue, what you said, the first part of that statement is pretty broad and vague. You know, I mean, but I think if it's anything that's directly, you know, on, let's say, for example, on 8th Avenue and we share 8th Avenue, or 14th Street, when we share 14th Street with CB2, you know, we definitely, I mean, usually it's an informal conversation. It's either myself or the chair reaching out.
Sometimes you do groups, right? East Midtown zoning, they ended up being a working group of different community boards.
Yeah.
And in fact, this month we have a letter that's being submitted. That's actually several different community boards are sort of working on their own letters, but with the same language, or pretty close to the same language, about mental health issues below 59th Street. So it's several boards working on it.
Yeah, but I think yeah, right.
But we don't normally, I recall, take a position on something that would affect another community board without having spoken to them in the first place.
Yeah. Well, then I think it's fine. And I actually think directly affected is as good a term as any, because directly sort of makes clear that it, you know, has to be some kind of significant effect on the other community board, but it's vague enough that we can tell them we just didn't think it was direct if somehow we got a follow on it.
Okay.
All right. That's all I have for 7, unless people have any questions.
Well, it's interesting, actually. One thing that had just sort of popped up in the back of my mind actually about an issue that came up this month at our HHHS subcommittee meeting or committee meeting, is that they were making a presentation was made to us by an outside organization, great presentation about local legislation that's being proposed at the state level that affects us very directly locally. So we understood that one. But then they were also saying, hey, this law that exists in New York City should actually be expanded to the rest of the state. Right now, it only applies in New York City. And they really wanted our support for expanding the law to the rest of the state. And indeed, some other community boards have written such a letter. And I found myself wondering, like, is that something we're supposed to, is that something we do? Because it's an issue that very specifically isn't about here. We already have the law. It's about encouraging the expansion of the law to the rest of the state.
Yeah, and in general, I'll just say that it's an unwritten rule, but I think in general, we try to stay away. The board has gotten into very sticky, conversations about trying to mandate something that we think is, we prefer or like to be going even across to another community board. So even going to beyond the state is a little way past our. I think you might be able to get it at my quick and dirty is you might be able to get out of committee, but then at full board you're going to run into folks that we're going.
No, I think an argument can be made, which is actually I think what was made in the other community boards when they wrote their letters, is that they've basically said if this became a statewide law, it would actually strengthen the foundations of our local law, right? So it would actually sort of protect and strengthen what we already have locally. So I thought, like, well, fair enough. But you're right. I totally get that there will be pushback. Yeah.
The fear there was during election years, sometimes state reps would go to community boards and ask them to support certain legislation. And you sort of getting yourself in. I know we once did a resolution on closing down Indian Point. So, I mean, it's not like it's uncommon to take a position on something outside.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay. All right.
And at least as written, I think this section doesn't really apply to changes of law. It's about support for-profit or not-for-profit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So in your case, if this was some not-for-profit entity that asked us to support them, that might kick in this section. But if it was really just asking us to, weigh in support of the underlying law, then I think this section doesn't apply one way or the other to it.
Mm-hmm. 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 Good. Okay.
Christine Berthet is in the attendee section and has her hand risen.
Oh, great. Yeah. Then come on over. We'd love to hear from you, Christine. Oh, Christine.
I was saying so exciting bylaws, right? Yes.
You were jealous not to be on this, weren't you?
Exactly. So you were passing through Article 7, and I just wanted to raise, I am not sure this belongs in the bylaws, but an issue that has emerged recently where resolutions which have been adopted by the full board were questioned by some members in public. And, the Article 7 said these are the resolution action of the board. And I don't know whether it would be appropriate to say once, the resolution has been adopted by the majority, right? It is now considered to be a position of the board. And and the members, when they are in speaking as community board 4, should respect that to whatever, should reflect that.
That's actually, the latter half of what you're talking about, Christine, is already included. It's just not in this section. It's under the speaking for on behalf of the board section.
Oh,
Yeah.
Says-
And,
Okay.
and I can't quite tell, Christine, what you're saying. Are you saying that?
well, I'm
um,
saying that, for example, we take collectively a vote about, I don't know, the Western Rail Yards, right?
Okay,
We
right.
took a long time ago with a whole list of things and we say this is really important, etc. Right?
Mhm.
And then members then go into meetings and say, "Oh no, the Western Rail Yard letter. This was not important. This is not, this is not relevant." As if we never did it. And
So, okay, because, yeah, so as Jesse was saying, so there are a couple different things. One, there is a section of the bylaws, which I can find quickly, but it's earlier, but that says that there are only a few people who are even allowed to sort of speak on behalf of the board on a particular
Right.
topic, right? But more importantly, it sounds like what you're saying is an action's been taken by the board. And then it sounds like you're saying that a board member at the committee level later on, whether it's next month or 5 years later, wants to sort of revisit the issue. Is that it?
no, it doesn't say they want to revisit the issue. They say it's irrelevant. The fact that there was a vote by the board is irrelevant, and therefore, we should not even think about it, consider
Right.
it.
So I think that, that's a little bit of a sticky wicket, right? Because, I mean, obviously, if the board's taken a position, the board's taken a position. So to say like, oh, that one doesn't count. I mean, it sounds like maybe what the person is saying is, oh, the issue that's before us right now is different than the one that the board already took a position on.
No,
No? Okay.
no.
Okay.
The board member said, oh, we write letters all the time, and those letters don't mean anything. And I'm like, what do you mean those letters don't mean anything? So, I mean, I don't know. You may not want to do it. I wanted to raise it, put it on the table, and say if somebody wants to clarify that those letters are meaningful and that they are, important, and they are going to be taken in account in the future, in future discussion and future. I mean, this is a position unless it's changed, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I was thinking about that section and say, okay, once we have letters, they represent the position of the board for future unless they are voted against.
Right. Right. Or unless they
Something
are.
as simple as that, which says, yes, they are the books until you change the books, right? Something like that. But
All right. Well, yeah,
it may
I'll
seem
definitely make
pretty
a note
obvious
of it.
to all of us, but it was pretty jarring to hear that.
Yeah. I
So
can
that's
imagine.
maybe just a quick sentence somewhere.
Okay.
All right,
Um,
that's all for me.
okay. All right. Thank you. All right, Frank, take us away. Where were we?
So, and again, I don't think we need to come up with answers to this, but just things to keep in mind. Article 8 on voting talks repeatedly about people having to be present at meetings to vote. So, we'll just have to keep that in mind, when we sort of work in the hybrid concept, whether we somehow define being present as, attending in person or, by video or whatever, or if we want to draw any distinction between the.
That whole thing was there because we used to have a piece of paper that you voted on, and some people would fill it out and then leave an hour into the board meeting, even though these things hadn't even been discussed yet, and they don't count, but they would vote. So, so we had
But it even goes beyond that. It says, all voting shall be in person only, no proxies. So again, it's just the wording. I understand the history, but I think we just have to smooth out the wording for hybrid meetings. The other thing that comes up in several places, which I don't think we do, says that voting shall be by show of hands, counted by the chairperson, and with the result announced by the chairperson. And I'm not sure even going back to in-person voting, we ever announced precise results. I mean, I think we sort of, you look around the room and say, this passed or this didn't.
Only if it was close.
Right. So we may need to smooth that out a little.
Well,
The other
Frank,
thing-
just a little bit of a pushback, and this isn't probably terribly important, but like, because I don't recall, it didn't say like, you don't have to announce the exact number of votes, right? That's not what it says. It just
Well,
says.
it says result. I guess. you
Right,
could
and if,
do it
and
either
like, if
way.
it passed, that's the result.
Right. But here's the interesting one, the record of votes.
Okay,
A record shall be kept by each member of the final votes, not recorded by a roll call on a sheet provided. Now, in hybrid form, we do a roll call at the end, so that's fine. In the old days, though, we did not do roll calls on most, when we met live, we did not do roll calls on individual items unless they were,
Land use.
yeah, land use and ULURPs. We did show of hands. So there wasn't a roll call, but I don't think any member was recording their votes on any sheet provided.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, we
no.
did do something at the end of the day, right?
yeah, no, I mean, not a committee, but at full board, you would have a full-on vote sheet, but
You should have been given a voting sheet where you
Yeah.
would keep your.
yeah, see, they would, that's what we would collect, for the votes. So that was done, not a committee though. I mean,
Right.
committee there was a minute sheet that was where the votes were recorded.
Right.
So,
Well, the committee vote was never deemed the real vote. It was always the board vote.
Yeah, except this section starting off says these procedures apply to all board meetings, including committee meetings.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
that is-
Yeah. So
Yeah.
again,
yeah, so
you
are
know,
you saying,
I
Frank, that
guess
maybe?
I'd be in favor of having this section apply only to full board meetings and not, hamper committees with, a lot of,
I
Yep.
agree. That's been the practice anyway. We're just correcting it
Yep.
to
Yeah. okay.
Yeah,
mirror the
I-
practice.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that's
Everyone
great.
okay with that? And then Katie, to answer your question, in that section I just read, it continues. At the time each vote is taken, the chairperson shall count all the votes and announce the outcome to the board. Now, to me, that sounds like the chairperson is supposed to be giving the numerical breakdown, not just thumbs up, thumbs down. But I don't think that's necessary. So again, maybe we just make clear, announce whether the motion passes or something like that.
Yeah, so Frank, actually, I would mention just one thing related to this. I've noticed that often what happens right now is that Jeffrey will say, are there any opposed, any abstaining? Great, it's passed. We're not actually voting, right? It's just sort of like the absence of opposition to the vote.
Yeah, although I always saw the vote at our Zoom meetings as being the roll call at the end of the meeting. That Jeffrey was just taking a sense of the room earlier on, or maybe he does that at exec.
he does that, but I gotta say, I can go back and there might be an exception to this, but in general, he does that with things that are not actual items on the agenda, but they are on the agenda, but like the minutes, the agenda, things like that. I don't think he does that with, letters per se. But if he does do that, then yeah, I think we want to make sure that if you're doing that, if you're asking about the other three, then, or the other two, then you should be also confirming everybody's.
Yeah, in favor. And I guess, and then are we saying that should happen as well at exec and at the committees, that there should be like an affirmative vote, not just asking about abstentions and opposition?
But at least the two committees I'm on, we do take official votes, and I think Nellie or Janine records them, and there's an
Okay.
official votes sheet at the end of the day.
Okay,
Mhm.
all right. And that can just be something, maybe, I whatever.
Yeah,
We
there's
do a
like
little
no
presentation to
technical
the
thing.
executive board or whatever. I can just remind everybody, like, we need to have affirmative votes, not just the absence of a no vote.
And also at the executive board meeting, Jeffrey, when we've had a friendly edit or amendments, friendly amendments, he's also taken the approach of if you're not in favor, then use the objection. Otherwise, all in favor, no vote. So I don't know if that makes a difference. If that's something we need to also clarify, but it's not actual vote of the, the
Mhm.
letter.
Mhm.
Right.
He goes, I'm assuming you're saying he says in the beginning, instead of who's in favor, he says who's opposed.
He has done where if you are opposed, he'll get a first, he'll get a second. And then like, if you oppose this, then say you oppose, use the raise hand function. But
That's-
if you don't oppose, then it's assumed that you're okay. But he also will ask P and E.
Yeah, that you could, I don't think our bylaws makes you do it the way. That's bid world, because Jeffrey heads a bid like I do. In the bid world, you never, don't ask me why, but you never ask who's in favor. You do a motion, someone seconds, you ask anyone opposed, anyone abstained,
Right.
and then you move on. That's
Yes.
usually no one, maybe one person at most with that, and so then it just goes through.
Right. That's why I just wanted to point it out.
Yeah.
We can definitely sit down and have a reminder that we need to,
But under our bylaws, you have to do it the other way. You can't do it that.
Yeah.
That's what bid world are. That's just the way it does.
Yeah.
It is
I
more
don't think
efficient,
we've-
I admit.
Yeah, but I suspect, I mean, I don't think there's any reason to change our bylaws in this way and not call for an actual vote.
No, that's what I mean. I would just keep it.
Yeah, I think we should keep it this way and then just remind, all the chairs, like, have an actual vote.
that Bob's explanation makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
That's how he does it in his day job, which is all he does. It's all.
Yeah.
It moves things. It moves things quicker. That's the reason
It
why we
does.
do it
I
that way.
admit it's much more efficient. But if we're saying you have to vote, then we should vote.
No one gets to, give a big speech as to why they're for it, and most people don't want to say they're against it. So things go through quick.
So just to get the feel of this group for terminology, when the bylaws talk in terms of, members have to vote in person or be present at a meeting, do we want to keep that terminology and make clear, I don't know, and, somewhere up front that, in person and being present means both physical presence.
I would keep the terminology and redefine it at the beginning of the bylaws as to what you mean by it, and then reference the hybrid model.
Right. And present would be physically, physically in person present at a meeting, or present live but electronically or something like that.
Mhm,
Exactly.
mhm.
I agree, because that's the way it's going to be defined in the law. I mean, it's.
Otherwise, we'll miss a spot where we say it one way and there'll be no idea how it's supposed to apply.
I
Yeah.
agree.
And then
And
I
then-
do think we probably need to make some reference, or maybe we don't, maybe it'll just be in the underlying law, but we probably need to make some reference to the fact that, like, when you're voting, you have to be on camera.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should reference to the underlying law, because that is included in the law. And then there's a lot of other things that are included in the law, and so rather than kind of miss one or choose one and not say the other, like, I do think, that we have to adhere to the law, which being on camera, which does require the quorum, that does require, public notice and access and all of those things. And so
I would agree. I would follow as per whatever the section is.
Right. Okay, and then the last thing, which I don't think we need to change, assuming we still agree with this, because I've never seen it happen. Section F is something called minority reports, which evidently is when part of the board disagrees on some action taken vis-a-vis a government agency. This allows the submission of a minority report signed by the individual members who are taking that position.
I've been
It's like a dissenting judicial opinion.
waiting years for a minority report. I've only seen one in CB7 done.
Okay. Any reason to, not to keep, I mean, any reason to take it out? I mean,
No, I think
I,
it's,
I think CB4 did one years before even I was
Yeah.
district manager. And it just was there because it happened once.
All right, I feel like we're gonna have to do a minority report just to make Jesse feel better. We're gonna have to find some issue that we can write.
it's just a, it's a massive headache for me. I just, I'm being facetious.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind taking it out, but that's
Yeah, but I think it's, frankly, I think it sends a bad signal, I think,
Yeah.
to take it out, right?
but I'm surprised Joe and JD, when they lost an argument, have never issued a minority report. They probably
Yeah.
don't know about Section F.
well, the danger, that's exactly the danger. Someone reads the bylaws and we've got like 6 minority reports a month.
And at least make it interesting, for heaven's
But I
sake.
do think taking it out would raise more eyebrows
Yeah.
at the full board
True.
than like
Yeah.
letting it slide through uncommented on.
Yeah,
It's pretty common in the community board world. I think other boards, it happens a lot. And so I think we'd want to just at least allow there being an avenue for a voice, a place for the people to list their voice if they did not agree with the action.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. Okay.
Okay, fine.
That's what I have for 7 and 8, unless anyone has questions.
Did anybody else have any thoughts about 7 and 8 before we go backwards and we go back to Roberta? Because I see that she's joined us. Hello, Roberta.
And so I don't have to interrupt later, as I think I mentioned, I have to leave right at 5. So
Okay,
if just going, I'll sign off and apologize.
perfect. Okay, so Roberta, over to you, my dear. And I believe that you were sections.
I think
5 and
6.
6.
Yep.
But I did have one question on 7, which there is a section, it is under 2B and then I, which sort of provides for a resolution of support for a program or proposal if a similar one has been issued within the last 6 months. Given that the board kind of puts forth certain like model letters, if it would be appropriate to like add something of that nature relating to, or is that meant to refer to those things? I'm thinking about, for example, the demolition letter was one of them. Or am I being absolutely incoherent?
Yeah, so say a little more, Roberta. I'm not totally sure I'm following. Sorry.
So, such resolutions may not be acted upon as new business at a board meeting unless either the appropriate committee shall have reviewed and approved them in a regular or special meeting in accordance with the preceding paragraph, or if the board has approved a letter or resolution of support for such program or proposal within the last 6 months, or the committee has reviewed in the last 6 months, and there's been no substantial change, and the item is added at the time of the adoption of the agenda. I'm wondering if that is meant to refer to.
Are you
Like,
talking about doing a letter again for like the same?
Yeah, and we've said.
Well, no, because I think, Roberta, you were saying like this is in connection, like this demolition thing, it sort of just came up at the last minute. It was sort of after the appropriate committee had already met that month, but we wanted to get it done quickly, right?
Yes, and is that, so because of the 6 months thing, I'm not sure if it would be covered by that, but I don't know if there's something that should be amended in the bylaws as to refer to those sorts of letters. Because it does seem like the board does them and sort of operates in a way that's sometimes a little bit closer to this.
So you're saying it's been more than 6 months and they were doing the.
Yeah. I mean, but it was one of the sort of boilerplate demolition letters that I think have been passed in previous years and likely for.
So
I don't
so
know
it's
why.
basically it's an issue that has been addressed repeatedly.
I don't know why they keep going. They did it when I was around too, going to the board for those demolition letters anyway. It really should be an admin letter.
Yeah.
Because the demolition is already a regulatory
Mhm.
issue. So it's,
Yeah,
you don't really need to do a board letter over and over again to say someone's violating the Demolition Act.
That's my understanding. What I read this section as being is like if I can't think of a good example, but we issue support for some organization. And then 3 months later, CB5 says, you know, what do you think of that organization? And if we did it within the past 6 months, it doesn't have to come before the board again, but Jesse can write and say, on March 3rd, you know, we took a vote and we support what, you know, this coalition is doing without having to come back to the board. So I think it's tied to enterprises, not issues. And I think Bob is right. If it's a recurring issue, we often deal with it as an administrative letter if it deems that, you know, if it's something that's sort of in line with the board policy. But I don't think this section is meant to speak to that recurring issue thing so much as repeat support for the same enterprise.
Yeah, that's an interesting distinction, Frank. I appreciate that, but I will say it's not recurring at the same address. What she is saying, right, is that, you know, we have these sort of demolitions that people notice and happens on this block at one point, and then 2 months later we see it on a different block, and we're basically reissuing the same letter. It's just about different addresses. Do you know what I mean?
And it sounded like Bob was saying that those should just be administrative letters and that they should.
I always looked at those as administrative letters because demolition is in the statute. It's already existing. The person is doing demolition. They're not supposed to. You don't need the board to sit down and debate it. It's just Jesse or whoever brings it up to DOBs at a district service cabinet through a letter.
Okay, that might, I don't know if that's just something that.
I do know there's a tendency for people who want to bring everything through the board because somehow when it comes to the board and to an agency, it carries more weight than when it comes straight from the community board itself, which is really not true. They just think it's that way, but really the agency sees it from coming from the community board either way.
Yeah, and with most of the what would be administrative letters, the result is pretty predictable. These tend not to be particularly controversial. The board would adopt them unanimously anyway. Okay.
And actually, and just one quick thing, sorry, but maybe this is just like the sub 5 there, you know, says the item is added to the agenda at the time of the adoption of the agenda. I mean, that's sort of a catch-all, right? Like if you want it to go to the full board for whatever reason, you can just have it added to the agenda and then that just sort of captures it. But it does sound like, generally speaking, at least in connection with the demolition letters, they should just be admin letters. Okay, all right. So I'm sorry, Roberta, back to where you were.
So we were looking at 5 and 6. So you have the board meetings. I don't know if there is a place or a home for like the hybrid policy within the bylaws, or if there's the intention to put it somewhere or a reference to it somewhere. So this might be a section where you might home that if you can create a separate section.
Yeah, and in fact, Frank was talking earlier about the fact that we're going to, you know, obviously have to make sure that all of the bylaws reference the fact that there can be hybrid and stuff. You're right.
So
what I just real quickly on that is when we passed the hybrid meeting policy, if you remember, I did actually make I guess I technically made a recommendation to the board to change what you got. Part of that policy was to be voting on a change of the bylaws, and so I included it in. Hold on one second, I'm sorry. Section E of voting in, it's called voting in person, section E of what is that, 8, under 8, and there's a link. And so which just goes directly to connects to the policy that we voted on.
All right. But that's not here right now, Jesse?
It is under, it should be under Article 8 under section E. At least it's on the website.
it's on the website. Yeah.
Yeah. So
well, yeah, and actually what it says here, at least in like the hard copy, is all voting in board meetings or committee meetings shall be in person open paren and or by video conference until July 1st, 2024 only.
Yeah, so I hyperlinked that section. So if you're looking at a PDF document, I don't know if it hyperlinked it, but
Yeah, it doesn't, but yeah, so we'll have to make sure that we,
we can fix that so people understand what that's in reference to.
yeah.
I just thought that was an easier way of you know, and I mean, we could do that in other places too, of course.
Well, I think we should probably just spell it out clearly and I think, I can't remember Bob or Frank, which one of you said, you know, we should also make sure that our definitions in the beginning are clear. So, yeah.
Well, both of us.
Yeah. Good. All right. Sorry. Back to you, Roberta.
So just does that, the adoption and the reference in the bylaws, does that make the adoption of the hybrid policy, I guess, does that adopt it into the bylaws? Does it do, is it a policy? What?
Yeah, you would adopt it into the bylaws.
You guys all voted on it, so it's
Yes. So it's in the bylaws.
Well, so we voted on it, but now as part of our bylaw review, we're going to clarify it and we're going to make it all
Okay.
nice and neat and tidy in the bylaws.
Instead of just a hyperlink, maybe we'll define it more ourselves.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
But we did vote it into the bylaws.
But it's in the bylaws.
Okay.
We're just
That
gonna clean, we're gonna
is-
clean it up.
Yeah.
That's tremendous. So then perhaps the voting in person section would be a place to add a little bit more of that. And I'm happy to offline provide like some language, or I'm sure other folks would also.
No, that would
happy
be
to
great, Roberta.
assist with
Absolutely.
that.
What is lovely.
And then I would also just write that into the quorum section. I did not really have any particular strong like edits for the specific meeting policy. I don't know if others had any concerns about Article 5 on board meetings.
I'm just trying to think of the appointed, looking at E, the quorum issue. A quorum shall be a majority of the appointed voting members of the board. So quorum shall be a majority.
Yeah, that means no public members.
No, I know, but I guess what I'm thinking of, like, okay, so let's say, actually Thursday night this week is going to be, let's pretend, anyway, Thursday night this week is going to be our first HHHS meeting that is at the beginning of the month. And let's say that it was hybrid, even though it won't be, but if it was hybrid, then we would say the quorum.
That's the same.
I'm trying to think, like, the quorum doesn't have to be in person.
Yes,
Just
Yes, it does. People can be on the video, but the quorum itself has to be in person.
Yeah, quorum doesn't change with the hybrid.
That's right.
The hybrid rule.
And well, but what's interesting is we were saying earlier that being if we're talking about being present, you can be present both in person and online.
Mm-hmm.
And if our definition of present includes online, then that would go to our use of the word quorum. That would actually include the people who are online. But I think as you were saying, the underlying law says that quorum has to be in person.
Oh, yeah. In person.
So we just have to be careful about actually how we define present. It actually.
I think we just need to redefine quorum.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I think we need to just look at the law, which is going to make this distinction.
Yeah.
And make sure we use the same terminology.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I'm just making myself a note here. Okay.
Oh, I agree with that, Katie.
Yeah. Okay.
I think present still stays the same. I think present for quorum. I think the definition of quorum really is the change.
Well, the definition is in person.
Yeah, it's in person.
You need a majority of in-person appointed members.
Yeah. All right. We're going to just have to look at these. All right. Fair enough. Okay. Anything else there? Roberta, from you?
On 5, no, but did on 6. I'm sorry, did I interrupt?
No, I actually wanted to go back to something that Bob said. I just want to get clarity on what you said, Bob. You said that the reason the way the quorum was written was so it couldn't be public members, but public members for committees count for quorum.
Yes,
Okay.
but not in the board.
Not in the full board. Okay, yeah, all right.
Only appointed members. That was always the difference. There's appointed members, there's public members.
Okay.
I'm done, Roberta.
Okay.
Great. So if we move on to 6, the agenda of the board meetings, there is in a note to mailing board members' agendas. I am
That was a long time
assuming
ago.
that is mail because the others are written notifications, which
Yeah.
I think can
There
be
used to
emailed.
be you used to get a whole packet with the letters mailed to you.
Can you imagine that? Can you imagine each of you getting?
Yes, I remember doing it.
Can you imagine how annoyed you would all be at me?
And we'd have to go down to the post office and go in the back to give it to them.
So, Roberta,
it was a bulk mail. You had to have it wrapped up in rubber bands a certain way.
so I think you're saying that we could just change the one word mailed to be copies of the agenda shall be distributed
Fine,
or
distributed.
provided.
Yeah, we can, and it could just be in writing, in the same language that we've that exists in the other places within the in notice.
Distributed in writing and posted on the. Don't you post them also on the website?
Mm-hmm.
I think so. And
Sorry.
Jesse, is it possible to make like do the bylaws work to post the agendas 5 days before the board meetings?
It should.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we say a week. I don't think we ever actually. I think the
Was it a week? I remember it was Friday. You had to do it by Friday.
No, we do it by Friday. I'm just saying. I think in the bylaws we always reference a week as notice. So we don't get into business days / 7 days. But, yeah, but yeah, I mean, we can say we definitely put them on our website. We can say we put them on our website, and we can't say you put the agenda on. Well, yeah, let's just leave it at our website because Link NYC is a little tricky. I can make the argument that we post on Link NYC 5 days in advance, which then puts our notice everywhere in our district, but it doesn't give the full agenda. So.
Okay, and just I'm sorry, say your language one more time. So you're saying change it from mailed to
Distributed
in writing or electronically, or I don't know, distributed.
Leave it as distributed.
Yep, to board members. Yep. Okay. And you're saying added to the website.
Well,
Right.
posted to the website.
Got it. Okay. What's next?
The other thing that I did want to bring up was specifically the speaker time limit because of the norms that I've observed adopted. It notes that each speaker shall be limited to a period of no more than 3 minutes. So technically we are following these bylaws, though it does appear that the general pattern is to use 2-minute periods. And then if it says if more than 20 persons have signed up, then you can restrict it to 2 minutes. And I'm wondering if that should be amended to say 2 minutes and 1 minute, or something that is more reflective of the way that the board operates, as far as I have observed it.
Does anybody know of any reason why it wouldn't be a good idea to just change this to reflect how we already do it? All right, so let's change it to 2 minutes and 1 minute.
Did we ever do 3 minutes?
Never in my.
It's always been 2 minutes as long as I can.
Good, then let's just change it and make it accurate.
I'm so glad no one else reads the bylaws as well.
so.
I took it.
Up
JD
to
Nolan was
3
in charge.
minutes. Thank you
JD
very
used,
much.
JD used to have a time watch. He'd hold the watch up and insist 2 minutes on timing you. The watch was broken, by the way, but no one knew that. He just said, you have 2 minutes.
And then, so I'm looking at number 3 about questions from board members. I think we had a little bit of a discussion about this, right, at our last meeting. Remember when I think somebody had mentioned something during the public session, and then Hector raised his hand and he wanted to sort of respond to it. And then there was a discussion about whether or not a board member should be responding to something that somebody says.
There was always a rule that a board member couldn't respond to something that's on the agenda, because if they did, they wouldn't be able to vote on it.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's mentioned there in the questions from board members.
Because we've had in the
right?
past to stop a
statement.
board member, to, don't say anything if you plan on voting on this. But I don't remember them not being able to respond to someone if their name wasn't particularly called out.
Yeah,
Well, what it says here is that they shall not be permitted during the public session.
I mean, they can sign up.
They can sign up.
They can sign up for the, which is what Hector, I think, basically.
Yeah.
I think that's what. Well, he didn't. I guess what he did was he raised his hand, and Jeffrey then put him into that slot.
It's not supposed to be a hearing, a back and forth. So
Right.
That's why if you really feel like you have to respond to something, you sign up.
Okay, so we're fine with leaving this as is.
Yeah, because I think you want to leave that flexibility.
You don't want to leave it, but then those go back and forth forever.
Okay, yeah, good, all right.
Oh, I did have one more note on this section, which was there is a frequency of comments provision where a board member may not speak more than twice on a particular topic except with permission from the chairperson, assuming there are no other board members waiting to speak. At least in committee meetings, I feel like that is not necessarily, I guess, what it feels like occurs, but also the chairs are running the meeting, so I guess that is their discretion.
Yeah.
But I guess frankly, Roberta, you raise a point, like, should we just delete this?
Like that is more my, I mean, maybe it's useful to have for chairs to monitor the flow of commentary, which they appear to do anyway, but I don't know if people think of this as a rule, as a provision of the bylaws.
I think it's like a best practice that has seemingly turned into a bylaw, right? I wasn't around when this was put into the bylaws, but like, to me, this is like a best practice of a chair, right? We've certainly seen chairs do this, right? Where they're like, yes, we've seen this person raise their hand 3 times or twice, and yet, and they're before 4 other people, but the chair, Jeffrey says this a lot. We're going to go to this person, because you've already got to speak. And I know, other committees do that.
You don't need that. I didn't even know it was there. I don't think you need that in bylaws, but it is a good practice.
It's a good practice. My only concern was like, then we lose it as a practice. I'm not to say like that just because it's in the bylaws, people follow it, but.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think we're going to lose it as a practice. I mean, plus, I think we can all agree that we don't want these meetings to go on forever, but it does strike me as weird to have it in the bylaws.
Yeah. I could see someone putting it in there when they were trying to make sure that, probably whenever this was, there was someone that wasn't.
There probably was, when this was done, there probably was a handful of people who would keep raising their hands and clog up the time. So they put it in that they can shut you up if you're raising your hand too much.
Yeah.
All right. So, but amongst our group, are we all comfortable with, raise your hand if you're comfortable with deleting this particular section?
May I just say one other thing, that it may just be that there should be some discretion as to the chairperson on like length of comment or number of times spoken, and it could be twice, it could be whatever, but that I think is what the practice is. And sometimes the chairperson is, says there is no comment on this particular subject for whatever reason. And it appears the way that the board operates that is more consistent with like the practice of different.
I see. So you're saying
officers.
don't
It's still just a
read
practice.
it, just revise it.
It's still just a practice. It goes back to Christine, who was here before. She wants some, if a letter was voted on, it should go out immediately at a certain date. But really, it's the practice of the chair and the staff as to when a letter goes out. They're not going to really put a date on it in a bylaw.
I guess the only thing that I would note as a distinct or worth keeping the bylaws is just the chair's discretion to at some point end or truncate debate because it is it's ultimately, if you have meetings that are going on for a super long time, like that's not actually good for members of the public. No one's going to show up and pay attention, and like there is a like good government aspect, even though I'm sure some people will be like, you're stifling debate. Like
if we do that, we should do that for the first vice chair too, to have the option to tell people in public. You have those public participated things where people are going to get up and say the same thing. Like if 6 of you could get up together and just say the same thing at once, speed up the.
Yeah,
Yep.
I agree with you, Roberta, in the discretion part, because I think then it creates a way for the meeting to move, effectively.
Yes. Keep the meeting moving at the same time, still hear what everyone has.
So we're saying maybe revise this to talk about chairperson's discretion about
Board and
You could say
board member
including
and public participation.
Yeah, like including but not limited to, and list a few things like that. Yeah.
all right.
You can even be honest about what it is in the bylaw and call it a best practice. The chair shall follow best practices, do his or her best.
Mm-hmm. All right, let me make that note. And then Frank, I know you have to leave shortly. Any thoughts on this topic?
No, he's good.
Yeah, no, I'm fine with where we're coming out.
Okay, great. Okay, then what's next there?
I think 9. Do we want to go forward? It's after 5. I don't
Exactly.
mind.
Let's go. Can people stay on just to see if we can get through?
I can be quick. I only have 2 things. I have nothing on 10. I thought
Okay.
it was fine.
Let's do it. We
And
said we
on-
might go till 5:15. So yeah, let's see what we
Okay.
can do.
And on 9, the one thing I just had was a typo. It said that the chair shall in constitution with the committee member, the committee chair. I think it means consultation.
Okay.
And then
And
the
if
other.
you could just pop me that one by email, that'd be helpful, Bob.
Okay. And the other one is just in, do we want to put in its own quorum? There was a discussion about there being shrinking the size of the executive for meeting purposes, where the exec committee would be considered the officers plus one of the 2 co-chairs, as opposed to both co-chairs. So if you wanted to do that, you'd have to put it in that section and then say the quorum is based on the officers and one of the 2 co-chairs. A majority of that.
Okay.
I didn't know if we still want to do that. And unfortunately, it was Frank's idea and he's gone off to the theater. But
Yeah. All right. Well, thoughts, everybody else?
It seems like it would streamline things. My one question, I guess logistically, the question would be, what if both showed up? Would one then be a member of the public? And then the second are the various members of the current executive committee aware of this? And I know that people are adults, but like, is this going to make someone very upset? Is my other question.
I would think not, but you never know with community board members. They may
So
take
the
me.
idea
You don't want me there?
was the idea to alleviate having people having too much events to go to, so that way they're kind of like tag team. You go 1 month, I go the next month.
Yes,
Was
to
that
alleviate the number of meetings you go to and to shrink the size of the committee too, because it got unwieldy.
and when you're at the executive board and there's a vote, and does the committee chairs vote, or is it just the named officers that votes?
Everyone-
Everybody.
So does the committee co-chair vote as one vote each for the committee, or two
Nope.
votes?
Nope,
Two
votes.
Two votes. And how would that change if we have one vote less per the committee?
It's just pretty much be for quorum purposes. You would just say that the only people, you only need the officers plus one of each chair to hold a meeting, a majority of to hold a meeting. That's pretty much what you're saying. More come, more come.
Wait, I'm
Good.
sorry, but so then you're saying, Bob, that then you think that then whoever comes should be allowed to vote.
I don't see how you could, is there a way to keep them from voting? I don't.
Yeah, I mean, we can define it however we want to, right? I mean, we could say that the executive committee is comprised of the officers plus
The two chairs.
Yeah.
But for meeting purposes, quorum and votes shall be based on a majority of the officers plus one co-chair of each committee.
That's how we do it here at my board. If we have 3 representatives per chapter. If all 3 representatives comes, only the chair's vote counts. The co-chair and the recording secretary will not count.
I will say,
then, sorry, what were you going to say, Jesse?
I mean, yeah, I guess the question is, I think Roberta's first question is the one to find, is to say whether we think this is really going to be, well, one, what does exec think about it? I do think most of the time you will have folks that are okay with missing an exec meeting.
Oh, yeah.
I think most of the time, but I think there will be, the concern is that then there will be times when people won't want to miss it for some reason.
Because there's a big issue. 9 times out of 10, most people would prefer not to go to the executive month. Trust
And
me.
9 times out of 10, you'll have co-chairs that are on the same page, but we certainly have had experiences where co-chairs are not on the same page.
Yes.
It is an outlier, but it has happened. And so I could see there being, one of those perfect storms of a big topic getting voted on an exec, and the co-chair that's decided to be there for that time to vote is voting, and the other co-chair of that committee is like, no.
Yeah.
And so that then it's like a very kind of, it is what it is. That's what we decided to put in the bylaws, and that's how it votes. I mean, so
I mean, in theory, you shouldn't have that problem because the exec really shouldn't be voting because the committee already voted.
yeah, no, 100%.
But exec votes on quite a bit. I'm also wondering, just like logistically, like for example, if I'm one of the co-secretaries, so one of the officers, but I'm also a co-chair, then in a way, my co-chair and I will sort of get 2 votes at every meeting, right? Because I'll be voting because I'm an officer, and my co-chair will be voting as like the rep of the committee. And like, if you think about our first vice chair and our second vice chair, they're definitely co-chairs of committees.
That's true.
Yeah, this crossover.
I think my general feeling, not ever having served on exec, is that if you're there, you get a vote, especially because our committee structure is not chair and vice chair. It is 2 co-chairs.
Mm-hmm.
So to ask people to make a decision where they're aligned beforehand, one's never going to trump the other because they are
Yeah.
co-chairs.
So it sounds like, Wendy, you're saying, yes, change the language so that for quorum purposes,
Yep.
only one has to show up.
But
whoever does show up
gets a vote.
then gets to vote.
Yeah, that's how I was looking at it.
Yeah, I think that for quorum reasons, that's easy. That's makes it a lot easier on all of us. You know, and then, and I will say the flip side of that, if you're going to go all the way and say it includes voting, the back of house stuff, like for us on this side, makes that becomes complicated, because then you're having to remember who, you know, who's voting that month and who's not.
Oh,
voting.
I see. Yeah.
And so I will say that's complicated. So I think if the
Well,
idea
this way they all vote, whoever their vote.
they all vote, but you can start the meeting once
Yeah,
you have.
But the quorum, and 9 times out of 10, the meeting will be non-controversial, so you won't, and you're controlling the size of the people there, you'll go quicker.
Yeah.
When you
So
have the real difficult ones, or sometimes, as you know, something gets through one committee and other members of the other committees don't want it, and then it becomes picked up at exec as a.
Yep.
Then you're just gonna get everyone, and even if you didn't have them voting, they'd all come, so it's.
Yeah.
You're not gonna keep them away.
I think it makes sense to me in terms of just an effective use of people's time and effort. I mean, I think we want to check with Frank if that's what he was.
Yep.
Envisioning.
I'll write something up and we'll run it by Frank.
Great. Now, I know we had talked about not going too past 5, or so actually first, Bob, did you have something for the next article, or was that it?
I didn't have anything for 10.
Okay. So one thing I'm just sort of thinking about is we had talked about, you know, trying to put together all of our thoughts, everything that we've discussed so far, and then circulate that around to everybody on the committee to take a look at. But one thing that we have not sort of opined on or really discussed is what we want to do, if anything, about the frequency of elections. Do we want to just have elections every 2 years? And then that saves all the time of the nominating committee and stuff in the alternate years, when typically right now people just rerun for the position and there isn't a change.
So
Go for it, Roberta.
So one, have not spent enough time on an executive committee to make a particularly informed determination. But I do think that the term limit factor may make this somewhat more challenging.
Right. I mean, it's a little messy, but what you can say is that, you know, I mean, this happens all the time, right? That somebody's, whether on our board or anywhere else, like if you're elected to something and you can't fulfill the term for some reason, right? And it turns out because you termed out, right? So maybe after 1 year you term out, then there could be an election, you know, if per what we already have in the bylaws, like if somebody isn't there for some reason, right? Then we have a set of rules about how their replacement is elected.
And it's that, but it's also potentially like the year that you kind of come in on affects the likelihood that you might participate in the executive committee. And then I would just, so you might come in on a year that
on a non-election year.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then it would be 2 years before you'd see another election. And that would preclude potentially like newer people from.
No, it would only be 1
joining.
year, wouldn't it? So let's say we had elections every even year.
Mm-hmm.
So if you join the board in an odd year, then you would only be 1 year away from there being an election.
It's the, yeah.
Or the even year. There's still like a point that you can join where you're just further away from the elections.
Mm-hmm.
And which is on some level like fine, whatever. On another level, it just creates a like, with term limits, winds up creating a different experience both on the front end and on the back end.
Mm-hmm.
So on the front end with getting involved with the executive board,
Mm-hmm.
and then on the back end from on fulfilling a term if elected. And so that, like, I don't know if there's a way to streamline the process for folks who, maybe it is a streamlined process for the nominating committee where they don't have to conduct interviews if there's no one else who wants to do something, to run for position. And then also a person is looking just to get a second year. That might be a way to approach this, but that would effectively give you, it would take away a lot of the like unnecessary administrative burden. I don't know if that's something that would be worth
Yeah,
considering.
I have to say, I can't quite wrap my head around that concept, because it, in a weird way, it seems like if you say, hey, happy to have an election every year, but before we have an election in the off year, as it were, in the second year, we're going to just see if anybody wants to run. And if they don't, then we're not going to have an election. I feel
like that's functionally where we are, though. Like,
but I also think functionally, there is tremendous pressure on people not to run.
Mm-hmm.
That it's actually not really, it's not encouraging at all more people to run, right? So to me, it sort of feels ineffective, right? Like, I feel like you should have elections, I don't know, to have rotation in office and to whatever, encourage lots of people to be involved. And if you're having elections and saying, but yeah, I mean, unless, I mean, I guess we can have an election if you really want to run,
I functionally agree that there is like a social status that, or, harmony that people are attempting to uphold. I just would wonder if effectively taking it away from people, if they so desired to run, if they so desired to run, even though that is not something that I have observed to occur, if that makes sense. And it feels like we're talking about something like it's like a solution in search of a problem, but I do imagine that there at some point maybe someone who'd be interested or in challenging an officer because they do not like the way a certain thing is being done, and to say that there is no opportunity to do that, I think would be negative. However, I don't think that you need to have as much administrative burden with the whole like re-election process. Sorry, Jesse.
No, I was just going to say, I think the two things for me is, and again, I don't know if we're going to get to this tonight because I have to actually jump off shortly.
Yeah, I think we all do.
You co-host if you like, but there's the difference between the election, because the election itself doesn't take too much work, right? The election is all you guys, right? There's a little bit of like, behind the scenes, we got to create a digital form and blah, blah, blah. And we'll have to go back to paper ballots at some point, whatever. But like, that's not too hard. It's the nominating committee, it's the meetings with the nominating committee, it's the interviews, it's the recommendation of the nominating committee, it's the report. That's kind of like
how about you have a deadline for people to say if they want to run, and if they don't, then there's no nominating committee, and the old slate gets sent before the full board. If someone does decide to run, then you have to form a nominating committee. And don't put it to them like, well, if you want to run, we'll have to do all this work. Just put it. Anyone interested in running, please let the board office know by such and such date.
Isn't that what we're doing now anyway? And
it's more or less
having served on the nomination committee, I would suggest that we do set the term limits for 2 years, because it takes half the year just to get the nomination committee, go through the interview process, do the ballots. So every 6 months, we're literally repeating the cycle again. And to Roberta's point about someone coming new might feel discouraged, I'm now on my 2nd year, and I can tell you, I've seen the election process. I've been on the committee now that I know I'm probably not going to still want to run anytime soon. I have 8 years to my term limits. So if I wanted to run, it'll be more likely towards the middle of my term section before I will be interested. So, and I would want someone who's been on the committee at least a year before they think they want to run immediately, not knowing what's going on with all the committees and how things are run.
So
You'll be surprised, yes, but if that person's really that engaged, the next year when it's up, then great, let that person run. But having it done every year is extremely time consuming from the nomination committee side and from the office perspective.
Now, there is another issue which we haven't addressed yet, which is that if we did consider having it be 2-year terms, then I think I assume we would not allow it to be 4-year terms. In other words, that we would say you can be elected once for 2 years and then you're done, right? Whereas right now we do allow it, like you can hold the job for 2 years and then maybe a 3rd year if like nobody else runs, kind of thing.
It has to be unanimous,
Yeah.
So,
which will never
Yeah.
happen.
but
Well,
but I think that if we were going to allow the 2-year terms, we would have to say like ixnay on the next 2 years.
I agree.
I don't know the effects of the term limits, and ultimately, I don't think this is going to be a problem for this particular community board. But I think you could, in theory, see a place where term limits create a relative leadership vacuum, and you don't want to, in theory, put yourself in a place where you wouldn't want to take out the potential for unanimous 3rd year for that reason, would be my argument. But I don't feel like deeply, super strongly there.
Okay.
I think I'd be fine with the sounds sort of like the middle ground, which is after a year, it's a question to everyone. If you want to run, let the board office know. If we don't get additional people who want to run, then we move forward with the existing slate without the whole there's no reason for them to have to come in and do the interviews and do all of that. So it takes off some of that administrative burden that Alice is talking about. I've also done the nominating committee, and it, it's not hard, but it is work, it is stuff. And if we don't need it, let's not do it. But then it also gives us that chance in case someone has, for whatever reason, really not lived up to the office, which has not been the case since I've been on the board, but gives us an out after a year for somebody, or gives somebody the opportunity if they really are so inclined.
Okay. All right.
I like-
Candace, what are your thoughts?
I'm sort of in the middle with like Wendy was saying, how the 2 years and like I said, I'm brand new as well. So it's not until like later on, I think, that you're going to want to do this. So you're already in your term. So I don't know if like actually the term limits of them having to be appointed from the board, if that's going to mess, like that was my big thinking, is how this is going to mess with the back end of it, of, say for heaven's sake, they don't get reappointed, we're now out of a board. So that's my thinking.
What were you going to say, Jesse?
Yeah, I was gonna say I like Wendy's idea too, because I think I do think we want to put in a fail safe of like, just in case, right? I think every year right now there's a fail safe, right? What if we elected someone and it was just a very poor decision on all of our parts, or that person has had just
or they could leave. I left as co-chair of the New York City Bid Association, gave it to the next woman came, it was a 2-year term. Next woman came, 2 months into it, she got a job someplace else and left.
Well, we already have the provision in the bylaws for, if somebody leaves, we know how to do that. We know how to replace them. But all right, let me give this all some thought about how we can put the language in about trying to give ourselves a little extra room and not having to have this nomination procedure or process every year. Because I agree with what Hella said. It's like, oh, for the love of God, we gotta
because we will have to start this up soon again.
Exactly.
In order to put the slate up in November.
Yeah. Now, look, I'm mindful of the fact it's 5:30. I know we all have to go. Now,
we
so
lost Roberta.
yeah, and I believe that our next meeting is 2 weeks from today. So I think it's on May 15th at 4:00. All right. So before that, so within a week, I'm going to try and circulate out to everybody, just sort of like a,
Where are we on now?
Yeah, an initial sort of revised draft. But what would be really helpful is if each of you can send me the comments and the edits and things that you've come across. If you can send those to me, by the end of this weekend or something, that'd be great. And then I'll turn it around and send it out. Okay, and I'll let Frank and Bert know as well.
All right,
Okay,
thank you.
it's as good as we're gonna get at the moment.
That's great.
All right, thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Bye.